Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are very happy to have you on the Android track. We are bootstrapping everything, and I want a big round of applause for Rebecca. We will have some cool animation stuff.
Hopefully, yes.
Good luck.
Awesome, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you today. My name is Rebecca, and welcome to my animation factory. If we could get some slides up there, that would be good. Cool. Welcome to my animation factory. We are on the wrong one. Yes. Okay, so I just wanted to say I'm very excited to be here with you, and today we're going to be learning more about Android animations. So for the past couple of months, I've been living in my own world of pure Android animation. And I've kind of felt like I haven't shared it with anyone, and just like Willy Wonka wanted to open up his chocolate factory to everyone to see, I would like to show my animation factory off to you today. And I think it's quite fitting being here in Switzerland, the country of chocolate. So a little bit of information about me. I may have a strange accent to you, and that is because I'm from South Africa. So I've traveled here to be at this conference today, and it's my first time in Lugano, which is a beautiful city, and I'm very excited to be sharing more with you. So I work at a company called Over, and we make a mobile design tool for making like Facebook posts, Instagram stories, and stuff like that. So it's like a very heavy graphic editor on your device. So a lot of the animations and examples that I'm going to show you today are from the app that we're building, and you can see some of the animations in the app as well if you use it. So we've all seen some great examples of animation in the wild, right? Everyone's opened some app and they have this like really delightful experience with using something, and you've probably thought to yourself, how can I do this, right? These are all some of my favorite examples from different apps that I've seen. So at the bottom, we've got little animated vector drawables from the Android Dev Summit app. We have a nice custom view animation on the pink one with like the background being animated. We have one of my personal favorites, the jelly toolbar, which like wobbles when it goes to the end, which I think is really cool, and we should all be using that. And then we have a nice one using MotionLayout from Chris Baines, which is just an example of how like animates something based on gestures. So hopefully today you won't leave here asking how. You'll be a lot more excited, but right now we're asking, how do I get these animations in my app, or these kinds of animations? And I'm so glad that you've asked, because that is why we're here. And we can all learn a little bit from Willy Wonka and his Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Okay, so the different kinds of animations that we're going to be covering today, surprisingly, there are a lot of different kinds of animations in Android. If anyone's tried to do any kind of animation, you'll probably agree with me that you just didn't know which one to choose, and there was like 20 different ways. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit, but there's about 8 or so different ways, the official ways to do things. So we won't be covering all of them. We'll be covering these ones today, and some of them aren't like official Google tools, but they are very useful to create some animations in Android. So if you want to have a look at any of the animations and how they're done, there is a sample app that I have on GitHub, and these are all just like really small snippets of code and how you can use animations in your app. So you can get it on GitHub and try out all these animations that we're talking about today. So the first one, animated vector drawables. So animated vector drawables is basically what we call a vector drawable and an animator set or object animator combined into one to give you an animated vector drawable. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, what is a vector drawable? So that's a very good question. So a vector drawable is basically just a scalable, density-independent asset. So that means if you put it at a larger size on your device, like if you make it take up the full screen, it'll not pixelate and it'll look really crisp and nice on your device. And it also doesn't have to be a larger size. It's quite a small file size generally. So they're represented by paths. So if you go and have a look at what an animated vector drawable is, you'll see like all this math commands in it and all that kind of thing. But basically, it's all just maths under the hood and like line drawing and that kind of thing. And it is very similar to the SVG spec, if you've ever dived into that, which can be quite fun. But basically, the SVG spec has a whole bunch of stuff that animated vector drawables don't support. So that's why it's very similar to the SVG spec, but it's not exactly everything is supported. And with animated vector drawables, it's a fire and forget animation. So once you start up the animation, you say start, you can't actually stop it in between at any certain point. So you will just have to say, okay, wait for this to finish, and that's that. Whereas some other kind of animation tools, we can set a certain progress of the animation. So we want it to stop at 50% or something like that, which is quite cool. Unfortunately, animated vector drawables don't offer that. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples of animated vector drawables. So these are two that I made for our app. So it's like just a little bin opening and closing and a little button to indicate sizing between letters. So how do you create these kinds of animations using, or put them in your app, right? You see all these cool little animations that people are doing, but you don't actually know how to go about putting that in your app or even creating that. So there is a lovely tool called Shapeshifter, and Shapeshifter is a tool that allows you to create animations for iOS, Android, and web. So it's not just for Android, but basically you create it online. You go to shapeshifter.design, and over there you can import your assets, and we'll go through that now, but you can import your assets and then create your animation visually without having to know how to code your animation, if that makes sense. So you can animate things such as path data, alpha, color, stroke width, and a whole bunch of other different things on this tool. So we'll have a look at it now. And it's made by a guy called Alex Lockwood. So if you follow him online, he's also got some really good stuff in terms of the animations he's made using this tool. So it's really interesting to see what he can make with this. I would call myself like a noob level when looking at what he does with this tool, but there's some really cool stuff that you can do. So this is what the tool looks like, and this is an animation that I made in it. So this is just like a bucket tilting and pouring out some paint for like a fill tool. And this is created in Shapeshifter. So I didn't actually code any of it. I just made different assets and put them in this and then got this view. So how do we go about doing it? So the first step is to choose the icons that you want to animate between. And I think this is probably the hardest part, because knowing what animation to make and how to animate it is like the crucial part about any kind of animation. And we'll get into one example, but once we've done that, we'll need to import it into Shapeshifter and then animate something. So in our case, we're going to be animating the path data, and then you'll have either something really nice and magical, or we'll have to do a little bit more work, which we'll get into. Okay, so first step. We've got two icons that we're going to be animating. So in the app that I work on, we have the ability to justify text and to center text. So when you're switching between these two states, it's much nicer to have them flow nicely between the two. So I want to take these two icons, and I want to take the first icon and stretch those bars out when it is changed to the other icon, okay? And these two icons are just downloaded from the Material Design icon website, but you can also obviously make your own if you can do that. But you might need to edit them depending on what exactly you're using, and maybe you need to morph your shape a little bit in Sketch or something like that. So this is probably the hard part, is deciding which parts to animate. Okay, so once we've got our two icons, we want to import them into Shapeshifter. So to do that, we just take the two icons that we've downloaded, SVGs, and we drag them into Shapeshifter and say add them as a certain layer. And once we've got these two layers, you'll see that they kind of appear on top, but that's not exactly what we want. So the next step that we want to do is actually animate between the two layers. So we would then click on the first path that we want to animate, and click on the little animate icon, or that little time icon, and we want to animate, in this case, the path data. And what we'll do now is take the second icon, the second path, we'll copy that path data object and say that this is the value we want to animate to, okay? And then we delete the other path that we've pasted. So now we've only got one in the view that we can see. So there we go. We have an animation between two different path datas, and it's beautiful, right? Everyone's happy? Yeah? Ship it, right? Okay, anyway, so we can see that there's a couple of problems with this, and what the cause of this is that the path data between the two doesn't match, okay? So the points don't really match, and that's why it's like shifting the two between each other. So we need to go and correct that to make this smoothly flow between the two. So in order to do this, the first thing that we want to do is do a thing called pair subpaths. So this is basically clicking on the path data item at the bottom, and we're going to click on the edit button at the top. And now we've got the two views between the two different path datas. And we click on the pair subpaths tool at the top, and then we need to start matching the bars to one another. So you can see as we start to click between the two, the animation starts to become less jumpy between the bars, if that makes sense. So now we've only got the two middle bars that are animating because the paths are matched. But you can see that they're not, well, they weren't animating nicely. They were like going all stretched and something like that. So we need to do something more to fix that part of the animation. So we would want to do something to correct those points so that the animation flows smoothly like that. And to do that, what we would do is we would click on this little auto magic tool at the top. You see there's like a little wand. And you can click on that, and what that tool does is basically calculates the shortest distance between the points on each animation and tries to align the points up quite nicely for you so that the animation flows smoothly. If that doesn't work, there is also more tools in here to go and actually like shift the points around so that the points are matching correctly and your animation flows smoothly. So this is what the final animation looks like, and that's more like what we were wanting, right? So as we would click on it, it now expands, and we are now in the other state. So once we've got this, we can export from Shapeshifter, and for Android, we would want to export as an animated vector drawable, but like I said, you can do it for other platforms as well. I just haven't done that in this presentation. So we would export as an AVD file, and then we paste that into our drawable folder in our project. So once we have that file, we can now use it with Android and use it in our project. So to do this, we would create the drawable. So we can use a thing called appcompat_resources.getDrawable and give it the drawable name that we want to fetch, and we can then set it on the image view that we want it to appear on. And then if you want to get more information about like when this animation will end, like maybe you want to do a toast or something like that, you can register callbacks on that drawable itself and get information like when it's done. And then to start the animation, I have just a click listener on the image view itself, and we would then just cast the drawable to an animatable, because that's what it is, and then we call start, and that'll just play our animation for us. So if we have a look at how that looks now in our app, clicking on it, we would get that nice animation out. So we would probably want to do a bit more here to like push it back into that position. At the moment, it's just animating one direction, but we want to probably add the reverse as well at a later stage. Okay, so animated vector drawables we've learned about. So the next thing that we're going to touch on is Lottie. So Lottie is a third-party tool. It's not made by Google. So it's made by Airbnb, and let's have a look at how we can use it. So Lottie itself as well is also cross-platform. So you can do an animation that you make. You can put it on Android, iOS, and web. So that's super useful because the animations that you can make in Lottie are like really beautiful. And it was created by Airbnb, so they have a whole bunch of examples online about how to use Lottie and like what exactly you can do with it, and there's just a whole bunch of awesome animations that people are creating. And to make an animation for Lottie, you use something called After Effects, which is an Adobe product, and you create your animation in this product, and you export it using a plugin called Body Moving. And what this is like a lot of designers will know how to use After Effects and know how to create animations in there. So you'll get your file from them. So you'll get like this little file, a JSON file that you can then put in your app, or you can download it from the internet. And one cool part about Lottie that that doesn't exist on like animated vector drawables, is that you can set the progress of your animation. So if you had like your animation at different states to it, you can say, okay, set it at 50% now or 100% or something like that, and you can control your animation, the progress of it. And like I said, you can download it on demand, so you don't have to store it in your app if you've got these large animations that you won't get to. It's like really far down in your app. You can download them at a later stage. And if you want to check out a whole bunch of examples, like really nice use cases of Lottie, there is a website called lottiefiles.com, and there's a whole bunch of really nice stuff that people have uploaded on there, so you should definitely check that out. So this is how you would use it in your Android app. So you just create a Lottie animation view once you've included the dependency, and you then just set the resource to whatever. If you've stored it locally, we've got a little happy birthday animation here. And then you can do certain things like set it if it loops or if it should autoplay and stuff like that. So you can see like the quality of animation that you get here is quite exciting, because this kind of thing to animate manually in Android is probably impossible or really, really hard to do. So yeah, that's Lottie. So let's have a look at property animations. So property animations is another way to do animations on Android, and you use something called a view property animator. And this allows you to animate specific properties on a view. So things like your alpha, your translation X and Y, and all that kind of thing. And these are also fire and forget animations. So you would say, go ahead and do this, and then you just like let it go and let it run its course. And I like this one because it's a very user-friendly API to use. So it's like really nice and simple to use, and you don't have to know too much, and you just sort of say animate and things happen on your screen. And this is it's nice and efficient when doing multiple animations at once. So if you have one object and you want to animate a few different things, you can do it all on the same object at the same time, and it's really easy to do that kind of thing. You can also combine them with animator sets, but we won't get into that today. And this is how you use the API. But basically here you can see we've got a view, an image view, and we say .animate on this view. And we give it the things we want to animate. So we want to get the alpha, we want to animate the rotation, the scale. There's a whole bunch of different properties there. And then you also get the with-end action that can happen when the animation is finished. And then we have just calling start, and that'll obviously just trigger your animation to go. And here is an example of a golden ticket disappearing and reappearing. And this is being animated, rotated, faded out, and faded back in, just with like the reverse of the animation. So you can do some simple things with this kind of animation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about custom view animations. So we've done like simple properties like alpha, strokes, translation, and that kind of thing. But if you wanted to animate something of your own view, like say you had a picture that needed to zoom in and out quite nicely, you probably can't do that very easily with those kind of animations we've looked at already. So custom view animations are when built-in animations just don't cut it. So you need something more, maybe more complex or more specific to the thing you're working on. And there are custom properties on a view, so things such as like a color, radius, or shadow maybe, or if you're using a matrix on Android, you can animate that kind of thing. Basically anything that you have on your custom view. So we use a thing called a property values holder, and what that does is it holds information about a property during, and its values during an animation. So we'll have a look more in depth at how that works in a couple of slides, but basically you use this to create animations with either value animator or object animator if you want to use that way. So there's a couple of different ways to animate a custom view, and the way that I'm doing it is not particularly the only way to do things. Like Android has, there's always 4 or 5 ways to animate, but this is how I've done it and it works, so yeah, why not? Okay, so this is an example of a view that has text, then the size of the text is going to be animated, and the color of the text is also going to be animated and changed. So I have this function called animate size color changes, and I pass in the size that I want to go to and the color that I want to go to. And then I create these 2 property values holders, okay? And this holds the current value of the text color and the color that we want to go to, and then the current size and the current size that we want to, or the size that we want to go to. And then we use the Value Animator API, and we pass in these two properties that we want to animate. And then using like a Kotlin.apply method, we set a couple of different things on this animation. So we set things like the evaluator, which is using an ARGB evaluator, and that's just like a built-in animator or evaluator to animate between two different colors. And then we add this update listener. So this update listener will fire every single time during your animation and give you updates every single step of the way. So now I have the ability to get the animated value at that certain time frame. So at this point, I'm saying, give me the size and give me the new text color. And then we're going to set it on our custom view. So we would, in this setter, we would just have the call to invalidate on your custom view, which means that it'll go and redraw your whole custom view again, and that'll have those new animated values, so the new text size and the new text color, and it'll have the effect of looking like an animation, but it's basically just redrawing the view on screen every single time. And then we call start, and that'll start and kick off our animation. So this looks something like this. So I've got a golden ticket, and that is increasing in size and changing in color, and that's being animated with a custom view. So this is just like a simple example because you can do these kind of things with normal views. I didn't use a text view in this case, I just used a custom view. So just to demonstrate exactly how you can use Value Animator. So this is an example of how we've used it in the Over app, and basically, we have this idea of zooming into a view or a layer. So like a layer on the editor, on the project editor. So if you click on one and you want to mask away something, it zooms into that specific view on the screen. And this is using matrix, the Android matrix. So basically, we're setting values on that matrix and it's zooming in and out as it goes. Cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about physics-based animations. So physics-based animations are also known as dynamic animations on Android. So the way I like to think of it is all the other kinds of animations are very static, and they are produce the same result every single time, whereas physics-based animations can give you sort of different looking results dependent on maybe a user's gesture or perhaps a user input. Like in our case, the example we're going to have a look at is when a user touches between two different points. So touching between two different points is driven by a user because you don't know what those 2 points are, right? And there could be two different values every single time. Or something like a fling animation where you fling something off screen. So that's very dependent on the user's velocity and stuff like that. So they are driven by force, so like a gesture or something like that. So if I scroll very quickly, I get a different velocity and stuff like that. And they are more natural looking, so they allow you to, so they just look a little bit better when compared to the other types of animations. And we'll see that in the example coming forth. But the main part about physics-based animations is that you don't set a duration, okay? So just like physics in the real world, if I drop a ball from my hand, I can't say to the ball, take 20 seconds, right? The ball's just going to fall, and at the time, with its own velocity and that kind of thing, but it has its own properties. So that's the same with physics-based animations. So you can also reconfigure them and set a different velocity, and the animation is recalculated, and the whole thing happens again, and it produces a smooth animation between the two. So there's two different kinds. There's a spring animation and a fling animation. And we'll have a look at the basic uses of both of them. So a fling animation basically is what happens when you're scrolling on any kind of recycler view or any kind of list that you make. And basically, if you fling something, it takes your velocity of your gesture and applies a fling animation to that view. So if you wanted to do your own fling animation, perhaps maybe with your own view, you can provide your own start velocity and some other components like a friction, and you can say what property you want to animate. So in this case, I wanted to animate the translation Y, and this is just then obviously scrolling on that view. So this is an example of it in that sample app. So I haven't taken the gesture into account. I've just got it on a button and set a certain value. But basically, you have the spring animation, which bounces sometimes, and then the fling animation, which you can use based on velocity. So this is an example of the app that I work on. So this is a color dropper that we had to implement. And the iOS team had this beautiful animation. And they were like, yeah, Android, go ahead and make this cool little bounce animation on this color dropper. So we had to figure out how to do this. And the other animation types just didn't really cut it for us. So this is basically when you click between two different points on a view, it takes the current color of that screen. And we ended up using spring animations to do this just because it looked a lot nicer and a lot more fluid between the 2 points. So how do we do this on a custom view itself? So basically, with a custom view, it's a little bit trickier than just something like the translation, whereas in this case, we had an X and Y point for that color dropper. So we create these float property compat objects that refer to the views setter and getter for that animation that we want to use. So in this case, it's a property for the X value. So the set value will just call set dropper X and get dropper X for the get value. And then the animation framework will actually go and use this property compat object and call this during the animation. So when it updates the value of your X and Y, it goes and actually calls this dropper.set dropper X and get dropper X for that specific animation. So we needed to create one of these for the X and for the Y as well. So to actually use it on the view itself, you can create the spring animation class and pass it in a this, which is just the custom view, and the property that property compat object that we created, and the point that we want to go to. So this is the 2 point. So point.x is the value that we want to go to. And then there's a couple of things you can set, like the stiffness ratio and the damping ratio. So I just set them to medium and medium bouncy, and we'll have a look at how those work in a couple of slides. But basically, at this point, we can then just call start, and the animation will run and bounce to that little point that we've selected. But there's also a really nice KTX extension function if you want to have a look at the dynamic animation extensions. And basically, you create a spring animation of a class, or you just call that method, and you pass it in the getter and the setter for your current view that you want it to use to animate. And then you pass it the point that you want to go to, and then the same things like just start and the damping ratio and all that kind of thing. And then this is how it would look. So this is the different stiffness ratios. So you can see the first one, stiffness low, the thing bounces around quite a bit. Medium, it doesn't bounce as much. And then high, it's obviously really not bouncing at all. So you can think of it like if anyone's played around with the Slinky as a child. I don't know if that's a thing here. One of those plastic toys that's a whole bunch of springs, different colors. So basically you can think of that. It's really springy, or a normal metal spring is not so springy. So you can think of it as that kind of stiffness. And then damping ratio also has an effect on the bounciness as well. So you can see now that the low bouncy, there's absolutely no bouncing going on. And medium bouncy, there's a little bit of bounce at the end. And then high bouncy, we have quite a lot of bounce happening. Is it happening? No. Okay. Well, anyway, there's quite a lot of bounce for that one. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, so we've touched on physics-based animation, so I'm going to go quite quickly through MotionLayout, since we've only got a couple of minutes. But basically, MotionLayout is the newest kid on the block, if you call it that. And MotionLayout is a subclass of constraint layout. So anyone use constraint layout? Okay, quite a few people. So basically, everything you've learned with constraint layout, you can apply to motion layout, but there's a whole bunch more. So there's a whole bunch of different kinds of animations you can do with motion layout. And it allows you to do really complicated UI element animations. So it's generally when you have something like a gesture driving your animation. So in that first example, if you remember back to one of the first slides, we had that example of the Stranger Things poster going behind and then coming back to the front. So that kind of thing you can do with a gesture of scrolling up and down, and you can use motion layout to do that. And one of the things it's really useful for is to transition between different layout states. So if you had like a loading animation or maybe like an initial state and then you want to transition into a different state, you can do that nicely with MotionLayout. And the thing with MotionLayout is that it's defined in XML, so you don't have to write a lot of code for it. So you basically just define the start and end constraints of your view, and MotionLayout figures out how to animate between those two states, which is really impressive. So this is a basic example of how I've used it, one of the ways you can, but I encourage you to have a look at the docs and the examples because there is like so many ways you can animate with MotionLayout. But basically, on this example, I'm using a gesture on the recycler view at the bottom, and that is a drag up gesture on the recycler view. And as I'm dragging up, the size of the view is changing. So I'm changing that the picture of Veruca, making it a bit smaller, and I'm animating in that background color in as we scroll up, okay? And when you scroll back up and down, the nice part is MotionLayout handles all that for you. So it handles the interpolation and all the like intermediate states as well. So this is how you would go about defining it. So you would create a separate XML file called with a motion scene inside it. And here you create a transition. So your transition defines the start and end constraints that you want to go to, and also the duration of the animation and how long you want it to take. So the transition that I have applied onto the certain view is a swipe transition. So I'm swiping on that recycler view with the statuses. And this, the drag direction is I'm dragging up, okay? And that'll handle all the interpolation between the bigger size image and the smaller size image. Okay. So we've got our transition defined. So the next thing that we need to define is the constraint set. So the start constraints is how the view will start looking. Obviously, that's quite an obvious name. And then we'll have the end constraints, which is the state that we want to get to. So you can set a whole bunch of different properties here in your start constraints. In this case, I've set the background of that view, that pink view, to be invisible. So the alpha is 0. But you can do things like setting the constraints itself, so like where it's aligned to and all different kinds of things. But this is just a simple example. You can also set nothing at this point. You don't have to set constraints if you don't need any. If you've got it defined in your layout file already, you don't need to put anything here if you don't have anything. And then we have our end constraints. So this basically specifies that the image view avatar must be the size of 40 dp and a height of 40 dp. And initially, in that first layout, it's set to 100 dp. So it is basically just interpolating between these two values, and that's what causes the animation. And then we animate the background color to have an alpha of 1. So it is now going to animate in, and you'll see the pink color when it is finished the animation. And that's pretty much it that you need to do. You need to just set the XML file in your constraint layout or in your actual layout file. You just set it to match this XML. But in code, you don't have to do anything really. Like it's all set up for you and everything, all the animation happens for you nicely. So just a quick look again at what that looked like. So as I scroll up, this view gets smaller and the background comes in and out, which is pretty cool. Okay. Last one. So MotionLayout also has this concept of keyframes, which is something that I've used and I'm really excited by because doing this kind of thing without MotionLayout is really hard. So having keyframes as part of MotionLayout is really useful. So basically with keyframes, what you can do is specify a certain property to be happening or a certain state at a certain point inside your animation. So if you have a look at that like bottom line that we have the frame position starts at 0 and it again ends at 100. So from 0 to 100, we have this state that is going to happen between these two constraint sets. But at a certain point, like for instance in this example, at 60% of my animation, I can set that I want this view to be fully visible, okay? So if the end state is that it's visible, at 60% I can say, okay, your animation is finished now. So like don't do anything from 60 to 100, okay? You can also do it the other way, where at some point you want it to be visible and then it must animate at the end. But you can really set up these cool keyframes using MotionLayout quite easily. So how does that look? Within that motion scene file that you create, you can basically, on a transition, you can create these keyframe sets, okay? And here you can set any attribute or constraint that you maybe have set before. So in this example, I'm saying at 60% of my animation, I want my alpha of this view to be fully visible and the translation to be nothing, okay? So at this point, you're basically done with your animation on this view. And you can add a whole bunch more here and make your animation really complicated and all different things happening on it. Okay, so how do you actually invoke a motion layout thing if you wanted to from code? So in the example that I'm going to show, this is not an animation driven by gesture. This is just something that happens when you start up the view. And you can basically just, in code, you can call transition to end. You can also call a transition to state. And you can provide it with a state that you want it to transition to. There is, interestingly, as well, been added quite recently, this past week, in the new version of Motion Layout, there is what they call, I think it's a B-roll or something, but if you have a view that's appearing on your screen and you want that initial animation, which is what I wanted, you can set up that initial animation state as well, which isn't being done in this example, but it's possible now. So this is the example animation. So in our app, we have this subscription upsell screen. And when you click on a pro item that you need to pay for, we have all these views coming into the screen and then this little option popping up at the end of the animation. So that's done using motion layout and keyframes, just to pop that thing up at the end. Cool. So like I mentioned earlier, there is a whole bunch of examples online by the Google team, the constraint layout and motion layout examples. There is some really crazy stuff they've done there, like oscillations and some really, really cool stuff. So I encourage you to have a look at that repo. And there's a really nice README as well with all the different animations that are happening and the different ways in which you can find them. And then that's also just a link back to my GitHub example for this whole talk. So if you want to see what's happening under the hood there. Yeah, so just to recap what we've learned. So we've covered animated vector drawables, we've covered shapeshifter, we've covered Lottie, property animations, custom view animations, and a little bit of motion layout. But like I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, there are other ways to do animations. So these are not the only ways, just remember that. So if you're doing something else, you might need to use one of these kinds of animations. But basically, you get things like transitions, transition manager, activity scenes, animator sets. There's a whole bunch of different ways in which you can do things. But the thing that I wanted to encourage you today is to spend some time learning about all the different kinds of animations and the different kinds of tools that you have at your disposal. And you'll be able to make some really great animations once you are comfortable with the different kinds of tools. So thank you so much for coming to my animation factory. I hope that you've learned something, and feel free to come chat to me afterwards if you have any questions. Thanks.